You ever wonder how fast your entire world can collapse? I'm talking about the kind of collapse where everything you built, everything you believed in, everything you loved just disappears. Well, let me tell you something. It can happen in exactly 10 minutes. I calmly asked my daughter-in-law not to smoke because my lungs were failing. My son snapped, "Shut up, old man. You stink worse than the smoke." And then he slapped me across the face. His wife smirked, raising her wine glass in a toast to my humiliation. The guests laughed. They thought I was just a helpless, sick old man living on their charity. But here's what they forgot. They forgot who actually paid for the roof over their heads. I checked my watch. 7:42 p.m. These people had exactly 10 minutes before their entire world crumbled. Before I tell you how I destroyed their lives, let me tell you who I am. My name is Matthew Patterson. I'm 58 years old, and for the last 35 years, I built an empire of diesel and asphalt. Started as a truck driver, sleeping in cab bunks and eating gas station food. Ended up owning one of the largest freight companies in the Midwest. But looking at me, you'd never know it. See, I wear flannel shirts, drive a 12-year-old pickup, and carry an inhaler in my pocket because decades of construction dust gave me emphysema. I look like a man who has nothing, and that's exactly what I let my son Christopher and his wife Michelle believe. It was Saturday, August 26th. I remember the date because it was the day my family died. Hot, humid Chicago weather that sits on your chest like a wet blanket. We were in the backyard of the house that Christopher called his own, a $1.2 million house with granite countertops, swimming pool, and a kitchen that cost more than my first truck. Christopher and Michelle had invited everyone they wanted to impress. Business contacts, suppliers, social climbers holding beer bottles and pretending to care about small talk. It was supposed to be a barbecue party. What it turned into was my execution. I stood by the edge of the patio trying to stay out of the way. Felt like a stain on their perfect picture. Michelle was holding court near the pool. She's 28, beautiful in a sharp, calculating way. And you know what she was doing? Chain smoking. Right in front of me. Now, she knew I had chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. She knew that secondhand smoke made my chest feel like it was being squeezed by a vice. But did she care? Hell no. She lit her third cigarette in 20 minutes, took a long drag, and exhaled a thick gray cloud directly toward me. I coughed. It was a wet, rattling sound that made a few guests turn their heads in disgust. I took a step back, pulling my inhaler from my pocket, but the smoke followed me. It clung to that humid air like poison. "Michelle," I said, my voice raspy and weak, "please, you know my lungs. Could you maybe smoke on the other side of the patio? You want to know what happened next?" Michelle turned slowly, looked at me with eyes that held zero warmth, flicked the ash from her cigarette, and it landed right on the toe of my worn work boot. "This is my house, Matthew," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I'll smoke where I want. If you can't handle it, maybe you should go inside. Or better yet, go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. You're ruining the vibe." I stood there, gripping my inhaler. "I'm not trying to be difficult," I wheezed. "I just need to breathe." She laughed. Cold, cruel sound that cut right through me. "Then hold your breath. Honestly, you're just a guest here. A moocher. You contribute nothing to this household, so you have no right to make demands." That's when Christopher walked over. My son. The boy I'd put through private school. The boy I'd shielded from the hard labor I'd endured. He was wearing a polo shirt that cost $200, holding a craft beer. He saw his wife looking annoyed, and he saw me coughing. Didn't ask if I was okay, didn't offer me water. "What's the problem now?" Christopher asked, glaring at me like I was some stranger causing trouble. "Your father is trying to police me in my own backyard," Michelle said, playing the victim perfectly. Christopher turned on me. His face was red, flushed with alcohol and arrogance. "Dad, seriously, you're going to embarrass me in front of my business contacts?" "I'm not trying to embarrass you, son," I said, fighting for air. "I just asked her to move downwind." "Shut up," Christopher snapped. "Just shut up. You're always complaining. You're always sick. You know what? You stink worse than the smoke. You smell like old medicine and failure. Don't ever speak to my wife like that again." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, looming over me. The guests had gone silent. The music seemed to stop. Everyone was watching the successful young businessman put his decrepit father in his place. "Christopher," I said, trying to maintain my dignity. "I bought this house." He didn't let me finish. He swung his hand and slapped me. It wasn't a playful tap. It was a full-force strike across my face. The sound was like a whip crack that cut through the humid air. The force of it knocked me off balance, and I stumbled back into one of those expensive patio chairs. My inhaler skittered across the stone pavement. My cheek burned. My ear rang. But you know what hurt worse than the physical pain? The ice-cold shock in my chest. My son had hit me. He had struck the man who taught him to walk, the man who paid for every single thing he owned. There was a gasp from the crowd, but nobody moved to help me. Nobody stepped forward. They just watched, eyes wide, mixing horror with twisted entertainment. "Michelle?" She smirked, looked down at me with pure triumph, took another drag of her cigarette, and blew the smoke directly into my face as I lay in that chair. "Get him out of here," Michelle said to Christopher. "He's killing the mood." Christopher adjusted his shirt, looking at the guests with a practiced, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, everyone. My father, he's not well. The dementia, he gets aggressive. We're handling it." Dementia. That was their narrative. That was the lie they were building to bury me. Here's what I did next. And this is important, so pay attention. I sat up slowly, didn't scream, didn't cry, reached down and picked up my inhaler, took a deep puff, letting the medicine open my airways. Then I reached into my other pocket and pulled out my old flip phone. I didn't look at Christopher, didn't look at Michelle. I looked at the time on that phone, 7:42 p.m. Then I opened a text message thread with a contact listed only as Rodriguez. You want to know what I typed? 3 words and 2 numbers. Execute plan 66. Hit send, close the phone, put it back in my pocket. Now, I sat there in that patio chair watching them. Christopher and Michelle had already turned back to their guests. They were laughing now, the tension breaking as they refilled glasses. They thought it was over. They thought they had shown everyone who was boss. Christopher wrapped his arm around Michelle's waist, and she whispered something in his ear that made him chuckle. They looked like the king and queen of the world. But here's what they didn't know. They had exactly 8 minutes left on their throne. I sat and waited. 1 minute passed. Michelle lit another cigarette, making sure to blow the smoke my direction. 2 minutes. Christopher shook hands with some contractor, probably bragging about assets he didn't actually own. 5 minutes. I watched the smoke rise into the evening sky. My cheek still throbbed with that steady, rhythmic pulse of pain, but it kept me focused. They ignored me completely. To them, I was just broken furniture now, something to be hauled away when the party ended. I saw Michelle point at me and roll her eyes to her friend, saw the friend giggle. They were celebrating their cruelty. They felt safe in their castle. 7 minutes. That's when I saw the headlights first. They swept across the tall hedges lining the driveway. But it wasn't just one car, it was a convoy. 8 minutes. The sound of heavy tires on gravel crunched over the music. Guests near the side gate started turning around, confusion rippling through the crowd like a wave. 9 minutes. The music cut out completely. 10 minutes. The side gate to the backyard was thrown open with a metallic clang that echoed across the patio. Christopher spun around, furious. "Who the hell is driving on my lawn?" he shouted, marching toward the gate. "This is private property." But he stopped dead in his tracks. You know why? Because entering that yard wasn't some lost delivery driver. It was a phalanx of men in dark uniforms. On their chests, in bold yellow letters, was the word security. Big men, stone-faced, moving with military precision. Behind them walked a man in a charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. Rodriguez. Christopher looked confused, then angry. He puffed out his chest like some rooster. "Who are you? Get out of here before I call the police." Rodriguez ignored him, walked straight past Christopher, straight past Michelle, and came to a stop right in front of me. The guests parted like the Red Sea. Rodriguez looked at me sitting in that chair with my red cheek and my flannel shirt. "Mr. Patterson," Rodriguez said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. We received the signal. "Are you injured?" I stood up slowly, dusted off my pants. "Yes," I said, calm as you please. "I was assaulted, and the terms of the agreement have been violated." That's when Christopher lost his mind. He stormed over, grabbing Rodriguez's shoulder. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Who do you think you are? I'm the owner of this house." Rodriguez turned. removed Christopher's hand from his shoulder with a slow, deliberate movement that suggested he could snap my son's arm if he wanted to. He looked at Christopher with the kind of boredom a shark might have for a minnow. "You own nothing, Mr. Patterson," Rodriguez said. "What?" Christopher laughed, but it was nervous, high-pitched. "Are you crazy? My name is on the deed." Rodriguez opened his briefcase like he was performing surgery, pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper, held it up for the guests to see. "Actually," Rodriguez said, his voice projecting across the yard so everyone could hear, "this property is held by the Patterson Family Trust. You and your wife are listed merely as conditional tenants. You should have seen the look on Michelle's face." She pushed forward, her cigarette burning down to the filter. "That's a lie," she sputtered. "Matthew gave us this house. It was a gift. It was a conditional occupancy agreement," Rodriguez corrected her, flipping through pages like he was reading a grocery list. Clause 14, Section B clearly states that your residency is contingent upon the respectful care and housing of the grantor, Mr. Matthew Patterson. He turned another page. And Clause 66 states that any act of physical violence, verbal abuse, or endangerment of the grantor's health results in immediate termination of tenancy and immediate eviction. Christopher's face went white as fresh snow. He looked at me with those wide, confused eyes. "Dad, what is this? Tell him to leave." I looked at my son. The mark of his hand was still hot on my face. I looked at Michelle, who was staring at the security guards like she'd seen ghosts. "You broke the contract, Christopher," I said, my voice steady as granite. "I asked you to stop the smoke. You slapped me. You terminated your own lease." "This is insane," Christopher shouted, his voice cracking. "You can't evict us. We have rights. We have guests." Rodriguez snapped his fingers. Two of the security guards stepped forward like they were choreographed. "Mr. Patterson has invoked the immediate eviction protocol," Rodriguez said, cold as winter steel. "The locks are already being changed as we speak. Your assets inside the house have been frozen pending an audit of the trust's funds. You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises." "Audit?" Michelle screeched like a banshee. "What audit?" "We're aware of the misappropriation of funds, Mrs. Patterson," Rodriguez said, "but that's a matter for the lawyers tomorrow. Tonight you leave. Let me tell you something about desperation. It makes people stupid." Christopher lunged toward me, fists balled up. "You senile old—" He never reached me. One of those security guards intercepted him, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back with professional efficiency. Christopher yelped in pain, forced to his knees on those expensive patio stones he was so proud of. "Let him go!" Michelle screamed, rushing forward. But another guard blocked her path, standing there like a concrete wall. The guests were backing away now, phones out, recording everything. The humiliation was total and complete. The king and queen of the suburbs were being dethroned in real time, and everyone was getting it on video. "Get them out," I said. Didn't shout. Didn't have to. The guards hauled Christopher to his feet. He was struggling, shouting threats about lawsuits and murder charges. They dragged him toward the gate. Michelle was escorted behind him, still holding her wine glass until a guard gently took it from her hand and set it on a table. "I'm not leaving without my purse," Michelle shrieked. "Your car is leased by the company," Rodriguez informed her. "That lease has also been terminated effective immediately. You can walk." I watched them. Watched my son and his wife being frog-marched out of their own party. They were kicking and screaming, looking back at me with eyes full of hatred and confusion. They passed the contractors and socialites who were now whispering and pointing like they were watching some reality TV show. They were thrown out onto the street, and that heavy iron gate slammed shut behind them with a finality that echoed in my bones. The party was over. The guests, realizing the free drinks were about to stop flowing, began scurrying toward the exits like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Within 5 minutes, the backyard was empty except for me and Rodriguez. I stood alone in the silence, took a deep breath. You know what? The air was clearing. The smoke was finally gone. Rodriguez walked over to me. "The house is secure, sir. The locks are changed. We have a team sweeping for any other unauthorized occupants. Do you want us to call the police regarding the assault?" "No," I said. "Not yet. Let them simmer tonight." I walked over to the sliding glass doors and entered the house. It was cool inside, quiet as a tomb. Walked through the massive living room with its leather sofas that I was never allowed to sit on because my clothes were too dirty. Walked into the kitchen with its double islands and professional-grade appliances that Michelle used to reheat takeout. I sat down in the armchair at the head of the dining table. It was a chair Christopher always claimed for himself. I sat there alone in the house I had paid for, and I felt this strange mixture of sorrow and relief washing over me. But here's the thing. I knew this was just the beginning. Christopher and Michelle weren't the type to give up. They were greedy, and now they were desperate. They were out on the street, humiliated, with no access to their money. And you know what desperate people do? They strike back. I pulled out my phone, had a notification from my bank. Attempted transaction denied. Account access revoked. They were already trying to get to the money. I looked at the security monitor on the wall, could see them outside the gate, standing on the sidewalk, shouting into their phones. Christopher was pacing like a caged animal. Michelle was either crying or pretending to cry. Then I saw something that made me sit up straighter. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Christopher ran toward it, waving his arms like a madman. He was pointing at the house, pointing at the gate. I zoomed in on the camera. Christopher's face had changed. He wasn't looking scared anymore. He was looking vindictive. Rodriguez came into the room. "Sir, the police are at the gate. Your son is claiming illegal eviction. Let them in," I said. But then Michelle stepped forward, pushed Christopher aside, and spoke to the police officer. She was gesturing wildly, pointing at her own face, then pointing at the house, putting on a performance. Rodriguez's phone buzzed. He looked at it and frowned. "Sir, we have a problem." "What is it?" I asked. "The officer is requesting entry. Your daughter-in-law is claiming domestic abuse. She says you attacked her. She's demanding an involuntary psychiatric hold." I looked at the screen. Michelle was wiping fake tears from her eyes, playing that victim card like a professional poker player. She knew that if she could get me committed, if she could get me declared incompetent, they might have a foothold back into my life. They weren't just trying to get back in the house. They were trying to lock me away. "Let them in," I said again, standing up. Rodriguez looked concerned. "Sir, if they have a compelling story—" "I have something better," I said, reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. "I have the truth." I walked to the front door as the police pounded on it, opened it. The officer stood there, hand on his holster. Christopher and Michelle stood behind him, smirking like they'd found some secret weapon. "Mr. Patterson," the officer asked, "we have a report of a disturbance." "Officer," Michelle sobbed, pushing forward, "he's crazy. He attacked us. He thinks he owns the house. He needs help." I looked at Michelle, looked at that smear of mascara running down her cheek. "You really want to do this?" I asked her quietly. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper so only I could hear. "We're going to bury you in a nursing home, old man, and we're going to take everything." I smiled. First time I'd smiled all night. "Officer," I said, "before you take anyone anywhere, I think you should see the security footage from the patio, and while you're at it, you might want to look at this medical file." I held up a folder Rodriguez handed me. "What is that?" Christopher asked, his smirk starting to falter. "This," I said, "is the evidence that your wife is no longer a registered nurse. And this," I held up a second paper, "is the toxicology report from my blood test taken 3 days ago." Michelle's face went white as fresh paint. "You thought I didn't know?" I asked her. "You thought I didn't know what you were putting in my soup?" The officer looked from me to Michelle. Her confidence evaporated like smoke. "This is just the beginning," I told them. "Run." But they didn't run. They froze. And that's when I knew the real war had just started. The neon sign outside the motel buzzed with a dying flicker Sunday morning, casting that sickly red glow into their cramped room. It smelled of stale tobacco and mildew, quite a contrast to those granite countertops they'd been admiring 12 hours earlier. Christopher paced that stained carpet like a caged animal, kicking cheap furniture. His $200 polo shirt looked ridiculous in the dim light. He was screaming at the walls, cursing my name, shouting about his inheritance and his rights. But Michelle wasn't screaming. She sat on the edge of that sagging mattress, staring at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She wasn't panicking. She was calculating. The shock of eviction had worn off, replaced by cold, serpentine rage. She knew that legally they were cornered. Those trust documents were ironclad, and the assault was on video. In court, they would lose. But Michelle knew something else. The court of public opinion doesn't require evidence. It only requires a good story and a tearful face. She pulled out her phone. Her eyes were dry and hard like flint. She reached up and roughed up her hair, pulling strands loose until she looked frazzled, rubbed her eyes vigorously until they were red and puffy, even tore a small rip in her blouse collar. In seconds, that arrogant socialite vanished. A terrified, exhausted victim appeared. Christopher stopped pacing. "What are you doing, Michelle?" She didn't answer, just opened a live streaming app on her phone, the one where she had thousands of followers who envied her lifestyle, took a deep, shaky breath and hit that record button. "Hey guys," she whispered, voice trembling perfectly. "I know I usually post happy things, but I can't hide it anymore," Michelle whispered into that phone camera. Tonight was supposed to be our barbecue, but it turned into a nightmare. The viewer count started ticking up rapidly. People love a tragedy, especially when it involves the rich and beautiful falling apart. You guys know Christopher's dad, Matthew, right? We've been taking care of him for years. We built that house for him. We wanted him to be safe, but the dementia, it's getting so bad. She gestured for Christopher to join her in the frame. He sat next to her, slumping his shoulders, adopting the look of a defeated son. "He doesn't know who he is anymore," Michelle told the camera, voice breaking perfectly. "He gets so confused. And tonight, he snapped. He got violent. He started screaming that he owned everything. He hit Christopher." She turned the camera slightly to show a small scratch on Christopher's neck, probably from his own collar during the struggle with security. "See what he did? And then he kicked us out. He called these men, these security guards, in his paranoia, and he threw us out on the street. We're in a motel right now because we're scared to go back." The comments began flying up the screen. "Poor you. That's horrible. Dementia is so hard. Stay safe." Michelle leaned into the camera, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But that's not the worst part, guys. And this is really hard for me to say, but I think you need to know why we're really scared." She shuddered, a theatrical, full-body tremor. "When Christopher's at work, Matthew would come into my room. He would say things, disgusting things. He would try to touch me, and when I told him to stop, he would just laugh and say he paid for me. He thinks because he has money, he can do whatever he wants." That was the spark that lit the fire. The internet mob doesn't wait for facts. They heard a young woman claiming harassment. They heard a story of a rich, powerful old man preying on his daughter-in-law. The comments shifted from sympathy to outrage. "Call the police. Lock him up. He's a predator." Michelle watched those comments roll in, and I swear you could see a tiny, satisfied glint in her eyes, masked by fake sobbing. "We tried to get him help," she said. "We tried to get doctors involved, but he's so manipulative. He hides it so well when strangers are around, but tonight we're done protecting him. We just want to be safe." She ended the stream. The moment that camera cut off, her posture straightened. The tears vanished instantly like someone had turned off a faucet. She looked at Christopher and smiled, a smile that would freeze hell over. "There," she said. "By tomorrow morning, he won't be able to show his face in public without someone spitting on him." Christopher looked at his wife with a mixture of fear and admiration. "You said he touched you. That's a heavy accusation, Michelle. It's our word against his," she shrugged. "And who is the world going to believe? The crying girl in a cheap motel, or the angry old man alone in a mansion?" They sat back in that dim red light, watching the view count climb. 10,000 views. 50,000. It was spreading like a virus across social media. They thought they had launched a nuclear strike. They had no idea that by going public they had just exposed themselves to scrutiny they couldn't survive. Meanwhile, back at the house, I sat in my study watching that same video on my tablet. Rodriguez stood silently beside me. I watched her lies. I watched the world turn against me. And you know what I did? I simply reached for the file that contained the truth about Michelle's nursing license, the toxicology report showing months of slow poisoning, and the security footage that would destroy them both. But first, Christopher was about to make his situation much worse. Sunday morning, 9 a.m. Christopher left Michelle in that motel room and marched downtown in his wrinkled polo shirt. He was going to sue me into oblivion. He was going to find the sharks in the legal world and feed me to them. He walked into that glass tower housing Sterling and Associates, the most aggressive litigation firm in Chicago, demanded to see a senior partner, used his title of project manager like it was some kind of shield. They ushered him into their conference room. He sat there trying to look powerful despite not having showered. Told the lawyer a story of a senile father who'd lost his mind and illegally seized assets. Painted himself as the concerned executive trying to save the family business. The lawyer listened. Lawyers always listen when they smell money. "I'll take the case," the lawyer said. "We'll file an emergency injunction to freeze your father's assets. But first, we require a retainer, $15,000. Christopher didn't blink. Reached into his jacket and pulled out the company credit card. It had a limit that could buy a small house. He'd used it for years to fund his lifestyle. He slid that card across the table with a smirk. Put it on that. The lawyer took the card and walked out to process the payment. Here's what Christopher didn't know. I had canceled that card exactly 4 minutes after security threw him out of my backyard. Been watching every attempted transaction on my phone like it was entertainment. In that conference room, the lawyer walked back in. He wasn't smiling anymore. He placed the card on the table and slid it back to Christopher with 2 fingers, like it was contaminated. "The card was declined, Mr. Patterson. The issuer states the account has been closed." Christopher laughed, nervous, high-pitched sound. "That's impossible. It's a corporate account. Try it again. Must be a chip error. We tried it 3 times, sir. The account is closed. Do you have another form of payment?" Christopher pulled out his personal debit card. 2 minutes later, insufficient funds. The air in that room changed. The shark smelled blood, but it wasn't mine. It was Christopher's. "Mr. Patterson," the lawyer said, standing up, "we're a billable hour firm. If you can't provide a retainer, we can't provide representation. Please leave." "But you don't understand," Christopher stammered, his face flushing red. "My father locked me out of my accounts. This is temporary. I'm the project manager of a $2.8 million company. You have 5 minutes to vacate the building before I call security." Christopher was thrown out onto the sidewalk for the second time in 12 hours. He stood there among the morning commuters, furious and confused. Pulled out his phone and dialed the number for the finance director at Patterson Freight. "Here's something I want you to understand. I have a recording of that call. Every word. This is Christopher Patterson," he shouted into the phone. "Why is my card declined? I'm at a lawyer's office and I look like an idiot. Fix it now." There was a pause. Then a voice he didn't recognize answered. "Mr. Patterson, this is Jennifer from Human Resources. The finance director is currently in a meeting with the new owners." "New owners?" Christopher whispered. The phone almost slipped from his sweaty hand. "What new owners?" "Patterson Freight was acquired this morning at 8 a.m. by Midwest Logistics Corporation. The acquisition was finalized by the majority shareholder, Mr. Matthew Patterson. All executive accounts have been frozen pending the transition. You know what I did? I sold it. Sold the company I built with my bare hands to my biggest competitor for a fair price. Not because I wanted to retire, but because I needed to cut the cord. As long as I owned the company, Christopher thought he had a future. He thought he had a safety net. I had to burn the net. "But I'm the project manager," Christopher screamed into that phone. "You can't sell it without telling me." "Actually," Jennifer said, her voice professional and detached, "your position was terminated as part of the sale agreement. Your access to the building has been revoked. And, Mr. Patterson, there's one more thing." "What?" Christopher snapped. "The new owners have initiated a forensic audit of the books, starting with your department. A process server is on his way to your last known address with a notice of investigation regarding $180,000 in unauthorized withdrawals over the last 18 months. The line went dead. Christopher stood on that busy street corner, phone pressed to his ear, listening to silence. $180,000. The gambling debts, the online poker. The money he'd siphoned off, thinking I was too old and too stupid to notice the discrepancies in the ledgers. I had noticed. I had tracked every cent. I had just been waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. He looked at his reflection in the building's glass windows. He wasn't a project manager anymore. He wasn't a millionaire in waiting. He was unemployed, broke, and facing felony embezzlement charges. I put my phone down on my desk. The financial strangulation was complete. He had no lawyers, he had no job, he had no company. And soon the auditors would be handing their findings to the district attorney. But I knew Christopher. He wouldn't see this as a consequence of his own greed. He would see it as an act of war. He would go back to that motel room and tell Michelle that I had stolen his birthright. And Michelle, desperate and vicious, would realize that the legal route was dead. She would realize that the only way to get the money now was to stop me from testifying, to stop me from breathing. They were cornered animals now, and cornered animals don't surrender. They attack. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy trying to destroy me publicly and legally, I had been conducting my own investigation. An investigation that would reveal something so shocking, so damning, that it would make their live stream lies look like amateur hour. The envelope sitting on my desk was thin, innocent looking, but the look on Williams's face told me otherwise. Williams was my private investigator. 20 years on the Chicago police force before red tape choked him out. He'd seen bodies pulled from rivers and crime scenes that would make stone statues weep. He didn't rattle easily. But that Sunday afternoon, sitting in my study with rain drumming against the windows, he looked pale. He looked at me not as a client, but as a man who'd just walked out of a burning building without realizing his coat was on fire. "Read it," Williams said, his voice rougher than usual. I reached for that envelope. My hand had a slight tremor. For months, I'd blamed it on the emphysema, on lack of oxygen. I'd blamed my fatigue, my confusion, the sudden bouts of nausea on pushing 60. I thought my body was simply giving up. I was wrong. I slid the paper out. It was a toxicology report from a private lab, one that doesn't ask questions and delivers results in 24 hours for a premium fee. I scanned the columns of numbers, the medical jargon that usually made my eyes glaze over. But two words jumped out at me, highlighted in yellow by Williams' marker: arsenic, benzodiazepines. I put the paper down. The room seemed to tilt slightly, a sensation I'd become used to over the last 6 months. I looked at Williams. "Arsenic?" I asked. "Like rat poison?" "Chronic exposure," Williams said. "Not enough to kill you overnight. That would look suspicious. An autopsy would catch a massive dose. No, this is microdosing. Just enough to make you sick. Just enough to damage your nerves, mess with your heart rhythm, and simulate the decline of a dying old man." He pointed to the second highlighted word. "And the benzos, high-grade sedatives, Valium, Xanax, or a cocktail of both." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a violence that made me nauseous. The memory hit me sharp and clear. It was 3 months ago. I was sitting at the kitchen table, gasping for air after a coughing fit. Michelle was at the stove, humming. She was playing the part of the beautiful daughter-in-law so well back then. She brought me a bowl of soup, tomato bisque, rich and creamy. "Here, Matthew," she'd said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I made this special for you. It has herbs for your lungs. Drink it while it's hot." I remembered the taste. It was slightly metallic, bitter under the heavy cream and basil. I'd complained about it once. "It tastes off, Michelle," I'd said. She'd smiled, patting my shoulder. "It's the new medication the doctor gave you, Matthew. It messes with your taste buds. Don't be difficult. Just eat. It will help you sleep." And it did help me sleep. I'd eat her special soup, and an hour later the fog would roll in. My limbs would feel heavy. My thoughts would turn to mush. I'd lose time. I'd wake up in my chair at 3 a.m. drooling, unable to remember the evening news. And the next morning, Christopher would look at me with pity. "Dad, you were talking to yourself again last night. You didn't recognize us. You're getting worse." They were gaslighting me, but not just with words. They were doing it with chemistry. "She was a nurse," I whispered. "She knew exactly what she was doing." Williams nodded grimly. "She knew the dosage. She knew how to mask the symptoms behind your emphysema. The shortness of breath, the confusion, the weakness. It all looks like natural progression to a lazy doctor. But the blood test doesn't lie, Matthew. You have enough arsenic in your hair follicles to kill a horse if it was given all at once." I closed my eyes. The betrayal went deeper than money. It went deeper than the house. This was biological warfare. They were dismantling me cell by cell, turning me into a zombie so they could strip mine my life. "And the inhaler?" I asked, a sudden terrifying thought gripping me. Williams pulled a small plastic bag from his pocket. It contained my spare inhaler, the one I kept in the kitchen drawer. We tested the residue on the mouthpiece. It tested positive for pulverized sedatives. Every time you tried to breathe, you were inhaling a knockout drug. I stared at that plastic bag. The device that was supposed to save my life was being used to shorten it. "This changes everything," Williams said. "This isn't just elder abuse anymore, Matthew. This is attempted murder, premeditated, calculated, slow-motion homicide." I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark grounds of my estate. The anger that had been fueling me, that hot, burning rage, suddenly turned into something else. It turned into ice, cold, hard, and unbreakable. "They tried to kill me," I said softly. "They didn't just want my money. They wanted me dead." William stood too. "We take this to the police now. With the lab report and Michelle's history of drug theft, they'll arrest her tonight." "No," I said. I turned back to him. Williams looked confused. "Matthew, they're poisoning you. If we go to the police now," I said, "Michelle will claim it was accidental. She'll claim I mixed up my own meds. She'll claim the arsenic came from contaminated water. She's a liar, Williams, and she's good at it. She'll create doubt. She'll get a lawyer, and she might walk away with a slap on the wrist for negligence." I slammed my hand on the desk. "I don't want negligence. I want them buried. I want them to face a jury for attempted murder in the first degree. I want life sentences." "So what do we do?" Williams asked. "We let them think it's working," I said. I picked up the toxicology report and folded it, sliding it into my inner jacket pocket next to my heart. "They're desperate. Christopher is broke. Michelle is exposed. They think I'm winning the legal battle, but they also think I'm sick. They think the poison is already working." I looked at Williams. "I need you to leak something. Leak a rumor to Christopher's old contacts. Tell them the stress of the eviction has caused rapid decline in my health. Tell them I'm bedridden at the old estate house. Tell them I'm alone, confused, and rewriting my will tonight to leave everything to a cat shelter because I can't remember my son's name." Williams raised an eyebrow. "You want to bait them?" "I want to give them an opening," I said. "Michelle knows the poison takes time, but if she thinks I'm changing the will, if she thinks the money is about to disappear forever, she won't wait for the arsenic to work. And when they get impatient," Williams finished, "they get sloppy." Exactly. The air conditioning in that motel room rattled like a dying engine, spitting out lukewarm air that smelled of wet dust and despair. It was the only sound for a long time. Christopher sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his cracked phone screen, trying to order pizza. But you know what kept happening? The app kept rejecting his payment. Insufficient funds, account frozen, card declined. He looked up at Michelle. She was standing by the window, peering through the gap in those heavy curtains, watching the parking lot like she expected FBI to kick down the door any second. "We have $12, Christopher said, his voice hollow as a grave. "That's it, Michelle. $12 in cash. I can't even buy us dinner." Michelle didn't turn around. She took a long drag from her cigarette and exhaled slowly. "Then stop whining and figure it out, Christopher. You're supposed to be the man." "I'm not the project manager anymore," Christopher shouted, standing up so fast it made him dizzy. He hadn't eaten a real meal in 24 hours. "I'm a fugitive, Michelle. I'm being investigated for embezzlement because you said nobody would notice the withdrawals. You said my dad was too sick to check the books." "He was supposed to be sick," Michelle snapped, spinning around to face him. Her eyes were wild, rimmed with red. She looked like a cornered animal, beautiful and dangerous. "He was supposed to be confused. He was supposed to be dying. You said he was weak. You said he was a pushover. I didn't know he was tracking us," Christopher said, pacing that small space between the bed and bathroom. "I didn't know he had a private investigator. And that video, Michelle, that live stream, it ruined us. Everyone knows. My friends, my old college buddies, they're all blocking my number." "It would have worked if your father hadn't pulled my nursing record," she hissed. "Who keeps a disciplinary file from 4 years ago? He's been planning this. He played us, Christopher. He sat in that big house and laughed at us." She walked over to the dresser and picked up the last bottle of water, drinking it greedily without offering him a drop. "We need to leave," Christopher said. "We need to take the car and go to another state. Maybe we can start over somewhere." "With what money?" Michelle laughed. Harsh barking sound. "Gas. Costs money, Christopher. Food costs money. And you think we can just run? You embezzled $180,000. They will find us. We'll be living in a trailer park within a week, waiting for cops to drag us away." Christopher stopped pacing. He looked at his wife. Really looked at the woman he'd stolen for, the woman he'd betrayed his father for. "Do you even love me?" he asked. The question hung in that stale air, heavy and pathetic. Michelle looked at him. She didn't blink. She didn't soften. She walked over to him, invading his space, and looked him up and down with a sneer of pure disgust. I loved the potential, Christopher. I loved the house. I loved the black card. I loved the idea of being queen of Chicago logistics. But you? She poked him hard in the chest with a manicured fingernail. You're just a disappointed little boy waiting for daddy to die. And you couldn't even do that right. The words hit him harder than a physical blow. The illusion of their partnership, the use against the world narrative she'd spun, shattered instantly. She wasn't his partner. She was a parasite, and he was the host she'd sucked dry. I should go to the police, Christopher whispered. I should turn myself in. Maybe if I cooperate, if I tell them everything you did with the pills. Michelle's hand shot out and grabbed his jaw, squeezing tight. Her nails dug into his skin. You say a word, she hissed, her face inches from his, and I'll tell them you forced me. I'll tell them you beat me. I'll tell them the embezzlement was all your idea, and I was just a scared wife doing what she was told. Who do you think they'll believe, Christopher? The man who already assaulted his father on camera, or the crying woman? He pulled away from her, stumbling back onto the bed. He was trapped, broke, hungry, and married to a monster. That's when Christopher's phone buzzed. Text message. He looked at it, expecting another debt collector or hate message from social media, but it wasn't. It was from Timothy, a former logistics manager at the company, one of the few who hadn't blocked him yet. The text was short. Hey man, just heard the rumor. Your dad is in bad shape. They say the stress caused heart failure. He's at the old estate house, bedridden. Heard he's calling lawyers to rewrite the will tonight. He's giving it all to charity. Thought you should know. Christopher stared at the screen, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. What is it? Michelle asked, seeing the change in his face. He's dying, Christopher said, his voice trembling. Dad, he's at the old estate. Timothy says he's crashing. Heart failure from the stress. Michelle snatched the phone from his hand. She read the text, her eyes scanning the words, processing the information like a computer calculating probabilities. Rewriting the will, she murmured. Tonight. She looked up at Christopher, and for the first time since the eviction, there was manic energy in her eyes. This is it. This is our chance. What chance? Christopher asked, confused. He's dying, Michelle. It's over. No, you idiot. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. Don't you see? The poison is working. It was slower than I thought, but the stress pushed him over the edge. He's dying, but he's not dead yet, and he hasn't signed that new will. She started pacing the room, her mind racing. So if he dies before he signs that new will, you're still the next of kin. The trust dissolves. The assets revert to the estate, and you're the only heir. We get everything, Christopher. The money, the properties, everything. But only if he dies tonight. But if he signs that paper, she continued, if he gives it all to charity, we get nothing. We go to jail for sure. We can't do anything, Christopher said, shaking his head. There's security. There are cameras. Think, Christopher, Michelle snapped. He's at the old estate house, not the mansion. The old house is secluded. And if he's dying, if he's confused, he's weak. She stopped pacing and turned to him. Her face was set in a hard stone mask. We have to go there, she said coldly. We have to make sure he doesn't sign that will. Christopher stared at her, finally understanding. I mean, we go there, we break in, and we make sure nature takes its course, she said. Or we help it along. He's alone. He's sick. It would be so easy, Christopher. A pillow, a slip on the stairs, too much medication. Who would question it? He's already dying. You want me to kill him? Christopher whispered, the horror finally piercing through his greed. He's my father. He's the man who ruined you, Michelle shouted. He's the man who cut you off. He's the man who's sending you to prison. Do you want to go to prison, Christopher? Do you want to be someone's girlfriend in a cell for 10 years? Or do you want to be a millionaire? She grabbed his hand, softening her voice, using the manipulation tactics she'd mastered over years. Baby, listen to me. We're so close. We've suffered so much. We deserve this. Just one night, one act, and then we're free. We can go to Europe. We can buy a boat. No more debts. No more police. Just us, rich and free. Christopher looked at her. He thought about the audit. He thought about the humiliation. He thought about the $12 in his pocket. The hunger in his stomach gnawed at him, but the hunger for redemption, for power, was stronger. He stood up. The decision settled over him like a shroud. How do we get in? Michelle smiled. It was a terrifying, victorious smile. We take the back road, we park a mile out, we wear black, and we take what's ours." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a towel. She unwrapped it slowly, like she was unwrapping a gift. It was a pistol, small caliber handgun she'd kept hidden from him for years. "Just in case," she said. Christopher looked at the gun. He looked at his wife. He realized then that there was no going back. They weren't just thieves anymore. They were about to become murderers. "Let's go," Christopher said. They left that motel room, leaving the $12 on the nightstand. They didn't need it anymore. Where they were going, they would either have everything or nothing at all. The rain had started to fall by Monday night. Cold, miserable drizzle that slicked the asphalt of the long driveway leading up to the old estate house. This wasn't the suburban mansion where the party had been. This was my original homestead, a sprawling Victorian structure on 5 acres of woodland that I'd bought 20 years ago. Isolated, surrounded by tall pines and silence. The perfect place for a murder. I stood on the front porch, phone pressed to my ear, making sure my voice was loud enough to carry over the wind, just in case anyone was listening, just in case Christopher still had friends on the payroll. "You're fired!" I shouted into the phone. "All of you! I want the perimeter cleared immediately. I don't want to see a single security guard on this property in 10 minutes. I'm handling my own business tonight." I hung up without waiting for a response. It was theater, of course. The security team wasn't being fired for incompetence. They were being dismissed to create a vacuum. I was removing the sheepdogs so the wolves would feel safe enough to approach the flock. I watched as the 2 patrol cars stationed at the gate turned on their lights and rolled away, tires crunching on wet gravel. The red taillights faded into the mist. The gate was left wide open. To the outside observer, I was a paranoid, dying old man pushing away his protectors in a fit of dementia-induced rage. To a predator, I was a sitting duck. I turned and walked inside, locking the heavy front door behind me. Didn't turn on the chandeliers. I kept the house dim, lit only by a single desk lamp in the library. Walked into that room, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The library was set like a stage. I placed the document on the center of the heavy oak desk. It was the fake will I'd drafted with Rodriguez earlier that day. The text was large, easily readable from a distance. It explicitly revoked all prior trusts and bequeathed the entire Patterson estate to the Chicago Animal Rescue Society. Next to the document, I placed my favorite fountain pen, uncapped, resting on the paper as if I'd just paused to catch my breath. I looked at the scene. It was perfect. It told a story of a man alone, making a final, spiteful decision. It was bait that would force them to act. They couldn't let me pick up that pen again. I checked my watch, 11:15 p.m. They would be coming soon. Desperation makes people drive fast. I left the library, leaving the door slightly ajar so the light from the desk lamp spilled into the hallway. A beacon in the dark. I walked down the hall to the wine cellar, opened the door, and descended the stone steps. The wine cellar was cold, smelling of earth and cork. But I didn't stop there. I went to the back of the room, behind the racks of vintage bottles, and keyed a code into a hidden panel. A section of wall slid back silently, revealing the safe room I'd installed a decade ago after a kidnapping threat against company executives. The room was bathed in cool blue glow from a bank of monitors. Williams was already there, sitting in a swivel chair, eyes scanning the feeds. Standing behind him were 2 men in tactical gear and Detective Thompson. They were silent, faces illuminated by the screens. I stepped inside and the wall closed behind me, sealing us in. The air was recycled, sterile. It felt like a submarine. "They're coming," I said. Williams nodded without looking away from the screens. We picked up a vehicle turning onto the service road 2 miles out. Lights off, moving slow. I pulled up a chair and sat next to him. My chest felt tight, that familiar squeeze of the emphysema. But I didn't reach for my inhaler. I needed to feel this. I needed to feel the weight of what was about to happen. We waited. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by Detective Thompson checking his sidearm, a small metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet space. "There," Williams whispered, pointing to the screen showing the east perimeter. At first I didn't see anything, just wind moving the branches, but then a shadow detached itself from the tree line, then another. Two figures dressed in dark clothes, hoodies pulled up. They moved with jerky, nervous energy. They weren't professionals. They were amateurs fueled by adrenaline and greed. I zoomed in on the camera feed. The resolution was crisp enough to see their faces. It was them. Christopher was in the lead, looking terrified. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with his sleeve, eyes darting left and right. He held a flashlight but didn't turn it on. Michelle was right behind him. She looked different. Her face was a mask of grim determination. She wasn't scared. She was hunting. She was the one pushing him forward, whispering in his ear, her hand gripping his arm. They reached the back patio. Christopher tried the handle of the French doors. Locked. I watched as Michelle reached into her bag. On the screen, the object was black and heavy. She handed it to Christopher. "The gun. We have a weapon," Williams said for the benefit of the recording. "Suspects are armed. This is now an armed home invasion." I felt a cold stone drop into my stomach. Seeing the gun was different from suspecting it. My son was holding a firearm. My son was standing on the porch of the house he grew up in, preparing to shoot his way in to stop me from giving away his inheritance. He hesitated. I could see him shaking. He looked at the gun, then at the door. He was having a moment of doubt. The boy I raised was fighting with the monster he'd become. Michelle didn't give him the chance to choose. She grabbed his wrist, steadying the weapon. She pointed to the glass pane near the lock. She said something to him. I couldn't hear it, but I could read her lips. "Do it or we're dead." Christopher nodded. He wrapped the gun in a towel Michelle handed him and smashed the butt against the glass. The sound was muffled by the towel and the thick walls of the safe room, but on the audio feed it was a sharp crunch. Glass tinkled onto the floor inside the kitchen. They reached through the hole and unlocked the door. They were in. "They're inside," Detective Thompson said into his radio. "All units hold positions. Let them commit to the interior. We want them deep in the trap." I watched them move through the kitchen on the interior cameras. They were creeping, guns raised. They weren't looking for valuables. They ignored the silverware, the electronics. They were moving with single purpose. They were heading for the library. They passed the dining room. They passed the grand staircase. They were heading toward the light, toward that single desk lamp burning in the darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. If I had been sitting in that chair, if I had been the feeble old man they thought I was, I would be dead in 30 seconds. They reached the hallway outside the library. They stopped. Michelle peeked around the corner. She saw the empty chair. She saw the document on the desk. She signaled Christopher. They rushed into the room. Christopher went straight to the desk. He grabbed the paper, reading frantically. I saw his shoulders slump in relief. It wasn't signed. He thought he'd made it in time. Michelle scanned the room, looking for me. She checked corners behind heavy curtains. "Where is he?" I could almost hear her scream. The library was empty. The house was silent. That's when I reached for the control panel on the console in front of me. "Now?" Williams asked. "Now," I said. I pressed the button that activated the main display in the library. On the monitor, I saw the 60-inch television mounted above the fireplace flare to life. The sudden light made them jump, spinning around, weapons raised, aiming at the screen. But there was no one on the screen to shoot. Just a video file I'd prepared. A video file that would tear them apart before the police even touched them. I leaned into the microphone that broadcast into the library speakers. "Hello, son," I said. My voice boomed through the empty house, godlike and terrifying. "You're looking for me, but I think you should look at the screen instead." The trap had snapped shut, but the jaws weren't steel. The jaws were the truth, and they were about to destroy my son's world. The 60-inch screen commanded the room, a rectangle of blinding white light that slowly resolved into Christopher's worst nightmare. He stood frozen, gun hanging limply at his side, eyes wide and unblinking. Michelle was beside him, mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook, the taser slipping from her numb fingers to clatter onto the hardwood floor. They weren't looking at me. They weren't looking at a police feed. They were looking at a room they recognized, the interior of a luxury suite at the Four Seasons, downtown. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks ago. I'd had my investigator Williams place cameras there after we tracked Michelle's location data. On the screen, Michelle was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed wearing a silk robe that Christopher had bought her for their anniversary. Andrew was standing by the window, Christopher's personal attorney, his college roommate, his best friend, pouring 2 glasses of champagne. They looked comfortable. They looked like a couple, but it was the audio, amplified by the library's surround sound system, that tore through the silence like a chainsaw. So he really thinks he can beat the audit? Michelle's voice on the recording was amused, completely devoid of the stress she showed Christopher every day. Andrew laughed, handing her a glass. Christopher couldn't beat a parking ticket without help. He's drowning. The books are a mess. He stole way more than $180,000. He's sloppy. In the library, the real Christopher let out a sound that was half sob, half gasp. He took a step toward the television as if he could physically stop the words coming out of the speakers. "I know he's sloppy," Michelle said on screen, taking a sip of champagne. "He's a useless idiot. That's why I married him. He was supposed to be the easy mark, the bridge to the old man's money." "You said he was smart," Andrew said, sitting next to her. "You said he was going to run the company." "I lied," Michelle said, leaning back. "I needed a husband who wouldn't ask questions when I moved money around. I needed a puppet. But now he's just dead weight. Once we get the inheritance, once the old man kicks the bucket, I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking my half and I'm gone." Andrew stroked her hair. "And what about the kid? What about the heir to the Patterson throne?" Michelle smiled. It was a cold, reptilian smile that I'd seen before, but Christopher never had. "What heir?" she asked. "The baby? Brandon's kid," Andrew said. Michelle laughed. She threw her head back and laughed, a sound that echoed hauntingly in the dark library. "Andrew, honey, do you really think I would let that loser touch me without protection? He thinks it's his. He thinks he's going to be a daddy. It's pathetic." "Then whose is it?" Andrew asked. Michelle reached out and touched Andrew's face. "Yours, obviously. The timing is perfect. We take the money, we let Christopher go to jail for the embezzlement, and we raise our kid on a beach in Italy." The video froze there. I paused it on that frame. Michelle touching Andrew's face, the smile of triumph, the confession of paternity fraud, the absolute total annihilation of Christopher's life. The silence in the library was suffocating. It was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and Christopher's ragged breathing. He turned slowly to look at his wife. His face was a mask of shock that was rapidly crumbling into something darker, something primal. "Michelle," he whispered, his voice unrecognizable, "tell me that's fake. Tell me. That's AI. Tell me you didn't say that." Michelle backed away. She hit the edge of the desk and stumbled. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon, looking for a lie that could save her. But there were no lies left. The video was irrefutable. The intimacy, the casual cruelty, it was all there in 4K resolution. "Christopher," she stammered, holding her hands up, "you have to listen." That was out of context. We were joking. It was role play. "You know, Andrew and I, we were just talking trash. It doesn't mean anything." "It doesn't mean anything?" Christopher repeated. He raised the gun. His hand was shaking violently now. "You called me a useless idiot. You said you're sending me to jail." He took a step toward her. "And the baby? Is it his? Is my child his?" Michelle's face hardened. She realized the pleading wouldn't work. She realized she was cornered, and when Michelle was cornered, she attacked. "So what if it is?" she screamed, her voice shrill and venomous. "Look at you, Christopher. Look at yourself. You're a failure. You lost your job. You lost your money. You're crying in a dark room holding a gun you don't have the guts to use." She took a step toward him, her arrogance so deep, so ingrained, that she couldn't help but mock him, even with a gun pointed at her chest. "Of course, I slept with Andrew. He's a winner. He has a plan. You have nothing. You're just a stepping stone. A cracked, broken stepping stone." The words hit him like bullets. I watched from the safe room as my son's soul seemed to evaporate, replaced by pure, white-hot rage. He had lost his father. He had lost his fortune. And now he realized he'd never even had a wife. "You used me," Christopher whispered. The gun steadied. The shaking stopped. "I survived," Michelle shouted back. "That's what I do. I survive. And you are just a disappointment." She laughed at him. Even now, even with death staring her in the face, her narcissism was so complete that she thought she could manipulate her way out. "Go ahead," she taunted. "Shoot me. Add murder to your list of failures. You won't do it. You love me too much. You're obsessed with me. You are nothing without me." Christopher stared at her. He looked at the woman he'd stolen for, the woman he'd assaulted his own father for. He saw the monster beneath the makeup. "I don't love you," he said, his voice dead flat. "I hate you." He cocked the hammer of the pistol. The metallic click was loud in the room. Michelle's eyes went wide. She stopped laughing. She realized finally that she had pushed him too far. "Christopher, no!" she whimpered, raising her hands again. "Wait, we can fix this. We can still get the money." "Shut up!" Christopher roared. I leaned forward in the safe room. Williams had his hand on the radio. Detective Thompson was already speaking into his headset. "Go! Breach! Breach! Breach!" They were going to kill each other, but the tactical team was outside, stacking up at the broken kitchen door. They had to run through the house. It would take them 20 seconds, and 20 seconds is a lifetime when a gun is pointed at a heart. "Christopher," I said into the microphone, my voice booming through the speakers again, "put the gun down. She isn't worth it. Don't throw your life away for a lie." He looked up at the ceiling. He heard me, but he didn't lower the weapon. He looked back at Michelle. "She ruined me, Dad," he said to the empty room. "She took everything." Then he lunged. He didn't shoot. He charged at her, tackling her to the ground. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding under the sofa. They became a tangle of limbs and fury. Christopher was screaming, a guttural animal sound of pure anguish. He had his hands around her throat. Michelle was clawing at his face, her nails digging deep furrows into his skin, kicking and thrashing. It was ugly. It was violent. It was the implosion of a relationship built on rot. The library doors burst open. The tactical team flooded the room, flashlights cutting through the darkness, voices shouting commands. "Police! Get down! Get off her!" They pulled Christopher off Michelle. It took 3 men to subdue him. He was fighting with the strength of a madman, foaming at the mouth, screaming that he wanted to kill her. They pinned him to the floor, zip-tying his hands behind his back. Michelle scrambled backward, coughing and gasping, clutching her throat. She looked up at the police officers, her face streaked with blood. Christopher's blood and her own. "He tried to kill me," she rasped, pointing a shaking finger at Christopher. "He's crazy." He broke in. "He kidnapped me." Even now, choking on the floor with evidence of her lies playing on a 60-inch screen, she was trying to spin the story. She was trying to frame him. One of the officers looked down at her. He didn't offer her a hand. He reached for his handcuffs. "Michelle Patterson," he said, "you're under arrest for breaking and entering, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud." "Me?" she shrieked as he cuffed her. "I'm the victim." "Not tonight," the officer said. I watched them drag my son and his wife out of the library. They were broken, bloody, screaming at each other. The perfect couple, the king and queen of suburban success, reduced to animals tearing each other apart. I turned off the microphone. I sat back in my chair in the safe room. The silence returned, heavy and final. Williams looked at me. "It's over, Matthew. We got them." I looked at the monitor, at the empty library with overturned furniture and the fake will still lying on the floor. "No," I said. "It's not over. Now comes the hard part. Now I have to bury them." The gavel fell like the blade of a guillotine, slicing through the murmurs of the packed courtroom. 3 months later, I sat in the front row directly behind the prosecutor's table, my hands resting on the head of my cane. I didn't need the cane to walk anymore. My lungs were clearing, my strength returning, but I liked the weight of it. It felt like justice. The trial had been a spectacle of mutual destruction. For 5 days, I'd watched my son and his wife tear each other apart in front of 12 jurors. Christopher's public defender painted a picture of a weak-minded husband manipulated by a sociopathic wife. Michelle's lawyer argued the opposite. Christopher as a violent, abusive tyrant who'd forced his terrified wife to participate. They were rats in a bucket, climbing over each other to escape the rising water. The district attorney, Ms. Anderson, had been methodical. The evidence was overwhelming. The video, the toxicology report showing systematic poisoning, the audio confessions, the break-in footage. But the moment that sealed their fate was when I took the stand. "Mr. Patterson," the defense attorney had asked, "your son is a broken man. He has lost everything. We're asking for leniency. We're asking you as a father. Do you really want to see your only child die in prison?" I'd looked at Christopher. I'd looked at the man who had slapped me, who had poisoned my food, who had pointed a gun at my empty chair. "I spent 35 years building a company," I'd said into the microphone. "I worked 18-hour days so that boy could have the best schools, the best clothes, the best life. I thought I was building a future for him." I'd paused, looking directly at the judge. "But I made a mistake. I built the road, but I forgot to teach him how to drive. I gave him the world, but I forgot to teach him the value of it. Leniency is for mistakes, Your Honor." What my son did was not a mistake. It was a choice. He chose greed over love. He chose murder over work. If I ask for leniency now, I'm not saving him. I'm enabling him one last time. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Michelle to 25 years without possibility of parole. Christopher got 20 years. As the bailiffs moved in, Christopher had lunged not at me, but at the air, reaching out as if he could grab the life he'd thrown away. "Dad!" he'd screamed. "Dad! Look at me!" I'd stood up, buttoned my jacket, and turned my back on him. I'd walked out of that courtroom without looking back. The autumn leaves were turning gold along the driveway of the estate today, 1 year later, painting the world in shades of fire and amber. I stood on the same porch where I'd watched my son being dragged away in handcuffs. But the silence that had haunted this place was gone, replaced by the hum of engines and the voices of young people. I walked toward the converted garage, now the Patterson Trade Initiative. I'd taken the money I'd saved from cutting off the leeches and put it into this. I was teaching kids from the foster system how to fix engines, how to drive trucks, how to build a life with their hands. I was giving them the tools I'd given Christopher, but I was also teaching them the work ethic he'd never learned. Inside the garage, a young man named Ryan was working on the transmission of an old Ford. Ryan was 19, covered in grease, with a past that involved more foster homes than birthdays. "Mr. Patterson," he said, looking up with frustration. "This thing is stuck. I can't get the torque right." I walked over and rolled up my sleeves. "It's not about force, Ryan," I told him, showing him the angle. "It's about respect. You have to respect the machine. If you fight it, it breaks. If you work with it, it runs." Ryan tried again. The bolt turned. He smiled, a wide, genuine grin that was worth more than every country club membership Christopher had ever demanded. I walked back outside as the sun began to set. I sat down on the wooden bench I'd built overlooking the valley and reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out a single cigar, a victory cigar, the kind I used to smoke when I landed a big contract. I struck a match and lit it, taking one slow, shallow drag. The smoke swirled around me, rich and earthy. I held it for a moment, tasting the freedom, then blew it out into the wind. I didn't take another puff. One was enough. I sat there as the stars came out, listening to the distant laughter of the students. For 35 years, I'd defined myself as a provider, a father, a victim of my own generosity. I'd let people carve pieces out of me until there was almost nothing left. But now I knew who I really was. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't just an old man with money. I was a builder. I'd built a company, built a trap to catch monsters, and now I was building a future for kids who actually wanted it. I was alone, yes. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't lonely. I was just Matthew Patterson, and I was still standing. Looking back, I realized that for too long, I'd confused enablement with love. I thought that by giving my son everything I never had, I was protecting him. In reality, I was crippling him. I learned that respect isn't a gift you give to family because they share your blood. It's a currency that must be earned. When you allow people to treat you like a doormat, don't be surprised when they walk all over you. The hardest but most necessary lesson was understanding that sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from crossing. Peace is expensive, but it's worth every single penny. If you believe that respect should never be compromised, tell me, would you have forgiven them, or did they get exactly what they deserved? The end.